Welcome to the countdown to new conditions of participation, part 2 of 4. As you know by now, the new conditions of participation begin January 13th, 2018. We've developed 4 Train the Trainer sessions. This is the second of the 4th. The next one will be on December the 20th, and then our final one on January 10th. We do have resources and documents that will accompany each of these sessions, and they will be presented within the weekly updates and with leader notes. We've also added the documents to an intranet tab under Clinical Excellence and New Conditions of Participation 2018 tab. You'll be able to view an event calendar also on the intranet that shows all of the clinical education that's occurring between now and the end of January. So please feel free to definitely go to the intranet tab, see what's out there for this particular session as well as the previous session, and for a recorded version of this particular session. So today's topics for this part 2 session are going to be a brief review of definitions of patient contacts. We discussed patient contacts in the first session, and so this will be a review of that information because it's quite important to make sure we get that right. We're going to discuss the notification types and who is to be notified. We'll discuss notice of rights, which will include rights and responsibilities, and the discharge transfer policy. We'll also talk about written information and instructions to the patient. We're going to discuss physicians on the plan of care, revisions to the plan of care, and revisions to a discharge plan. Each of these different types of notifications do require us to communicate with particular individuals, and we'll go through that. We will discuss the request for the clinical record, and then also the transfer and discharge summaries. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So just to review the definitions, patient contact types, we spoke about this, and this slide was in the first session. So to support the concept of the patient-centered care, the CMS has identified specific patient contact types, and we're required now by the conditions of participation to identify these contact types if they exist. So a patient may or may not have them, but if they do, we have to document this particular contact type in home care home base, not only to meet the conditions, but it will also facilitate the office being able to communicate and send out certain notices to the right person, and it will also help the field clinicians know who they need to communicate as well. So definitely very important to identify these contacts properly in our system. We have the primary caregiver, which is any individual who renders uncompensated care to a patient. So this would be the person that provides that one-on-one ADL, ADL type of assistance to the patient. So the primary caregiver. Then we have a legal representative, that this particular person acts on legal authority, such as like a legal guardian, to make healthcare decisions for the patient. So this is somebody that's been appointed by the court to oversee the patient's care because the patient cannot oversee their own care. And then we have the patient selected representative. This is a person that the patient can actually choose, and if for some reason the patient feels that they need assistance in helping make medical decisions, so they've had some illness or injury that might be impairing their judgment or cognition, and they need assistance in making decisions medically, they can appoint somebody to help them make those decisions, and that particular person is given the title of a patient-selected representative. This particular patient-selected representative, their role is actually determined by the patient, so they can have as much input on the patient's medical care as the patient would want them to. So it's definitely up to the patient how much information we share with the patient-selected representative, and what our responsibilities is in providing them with information. So those are just a review of the definitions of patient contact types. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the first notice. So the first notice that we are now required to give beyond just the patient is notice of rights. And underneath the notice of rights are patient rights and responsibilities and the discharge and transfer policy. So the standard states that the home health agency must provide to the patient, which we already do that, and the patient's representative, that'll be our new part, the following information during the initial evaluation visit in advance of furnishing care to the patient. Now, the discharge and transfer policy is new to us, and we did place that policy in the patient orientation handbook, so it's there for the review. But looking at the definition of an initial evaluation visit and in advance, so CMS states that the initial evaluation visit is just that. It's the initial assessment visit that's conducted to determine the immediate care and support needed in the home. And then in advance means prior to performing any hands-on care or any patient education. So the notice of rights and responsibilities and the discharge and transfer policy has to be presented in writing to the patient, as well as the representative, if any, during the initial evaluation visit or prior to, and in advance to performing any hands-on care or patient education. So just a little bit more highlights about notice of rights, just to kind of touch on some important points, because again, the conditions of participation are very, the patient-centered care need definitely comes out in the conditions. So we definitely will want to make sure that we continue collaborating and communicating even more than we already have, and that the notice of rights, patient rights and responsibilities, representative rights and responsibilities, to make sure that we know our policies and procedures and that we adhere to them. So these next two slides will just touch base on some of those really important points on what we should know in regards to notice of patient rights. So they must be written notices, which we do have in the orientation handbook. They must be in plain language and understandable to persons who have limited English proficiency. So anybody that would require an oral interpretation or written translation, we do have a policy that supports that. And any time that we would provide that service, it is at no cost to the patient. It has to be in plain language, and the definition of plain language is the ability to understand the first time that it is read or heard. And language that is plain to one person may not be plain to another. So we have to keep that in mind. Plain language is when it is read and understood, that the patient can find what they need, understand what they find, and to use what they find to meet their needs. So it's very important that we utilize the plain language philosophy. The written notices must be accessible and timely to individuals with disabilities. So again, anytime we would need to link them to a website or provide auxiliary aids, we do that at no cost to the patient. And then an important point to remember is that upon interview, so upon survey, if a patient or representative was asked, they must be able to confirm that their rights and responsibilities, as well as the transfer and discharge policies, were explained and provided to them. And moving on to the next slide, in addition, for our non-English speaking patients and representatives, the agencies can provide verbal notice of rights and responsibilities to them, as well as the discharge and transfer policy. But when that occurs, it has to be in the individual's primary language. So it must be in a manner that the individual understands, and then again, interpretation or translation is free of charge. If we use a competent interpreter, we need to follow the policy, so definitely look at the policy in regards to interpretation. And we can do this verbally, physically, electronically, telephonically. And CMS had given us the standard that we can provide this particular service no later than the second visit. So if it takes some time to get the translator coordinated, the interpreter coordinated, we can do that, and CMS is giving us that time to coordinate that service, but we have to do it within the second visit in the patient's home. So documentation, again, if we utilize the first and second visit to to meet this standard, we definitely want our documentation to show what measures we are taking in order to provide the service to the patient. So we definitely want to make sure our documentation supports the measures that we're taking in that patient's home to provide this right to them. So let's talk a little bit about the steps and how we're going to do this. This will be the most difficult one of the session here. So if we can kind of grasp this one, we're doing really good. The rest of it will come quite easy. So information, where to find it. We can find it in the orientation handbook. Page 4 is the discharge and transfer policy. Page 11 through 16 is the rights and responsibility. Information goes to the patient, of course, the legal representative or legal guardian, if there is any, and then at the patient's request, we can provide it to the patient selected representative within 4 business days of the admission. So remember, I said on a patient selected representative that the patient lets us know at what extent that they want information to go to the patient selected representative. So it is up to them if we send the rights and responsibilities. But the legal representative, legal representative and the legal guardian, that's entirely different. This is somebody that's been appointed by the court of law to oversee the patient's care. So we must get the information to them in writing prior to any care, just as we would with the patient. Okay, so we're going to move on and look at some additional steps. So in order to help our clinicians in the field work down through what we just spoke about, new assessment questions have been added to the care coordination section of the Point Care tablet. And in just a minute, I will show you an educational flyer that will go down through those questions, and that way you can better understand. Now, just to repeat, if the patient has a court-appointed legal representative or legal guardian, we must obtain a signature on the consent form which identifies that the rights and responsibilities and discharge and transfer policy have been discussed and provided to these individuals. So a signature on the consent will give us that documentation that we need. If it's a patient selected representative and they happen not to be in the home during our visit, then the patient, at their request, we can then mail or send electronically the notice of rights and the discharge and transfer policy, but it does have to be within 4 business days. Now, we've provided a PDF copy of the notices of both the rights and responsibilities and the discharge transfer policy. We put it in one PDF version, and it is on the intranet in 3 different places. So hopefully when you need to use this, your mind will be able to go to one of the areas and be able to find it. Of course, if not, then you certainly can ask. But the first place you'll find it is on the forms page. It'll have its own identifier on that main forms page, and you click on it and it'll take you to the PDF document. On the Clinical Excellence and New COP 2018 tab, you'll find a copy there. And then you'll also find a copy attached to the Administrative Policy 33.03, which is the Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. So let's talk about the new assessment questions. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a document entitled Patients' Rights and Responsibilities and Discharge Transfer Policy. This is a 2-page flyer that you can use with staff to help educate them on how to work down through this standard. So you have the definition of the standard first. You have what standards that we are held to in regards to a legal representative. So if a patient has a legal representative, we have to make sure we follow these standards. If the patient has a patient selected representative, we have to follow these standards. And this is just what I just spoke about. So it's just the same information that we looked at in the past couple slides. So let's look at the new assessment questions. There are 3 of them that our staff will see in the home. The first one pertains to the primary caregiver, second one to a legal representative or legal guardian, and the third one to the patient selected representative. First question says, does the patient receive assistance with ADLs and IADLs? If they do, they probably have a primary caregiver. So two answers can be selected from. We have a yes and a no. If yes, the patient does have a primary caregiver, it does give a prompt by that yes answer to make sure that the clinician ensures that the contacts within home care home base has been updated with this particular contact name and contact address. We can also provide an email address if we would like as well, because some of the things that we're able to provide we can do electronically. So as much information into that contact section that you can provide, that is what we'll need moving forward. Second question, does the patient have a court-appointed legal representative or legal guardian? Again, two answers, yes or no. If they do, then there's more questions, one more question. If they say yes, it gives them that same prompt to make sure that that information's in home care home base contacts. But then the second question is going to be, is the legal representative or legal guardian available in the home on the admission visit? If the answer is yes, then the expectation is that the clinician verbally reviews the rights and responsibilities in the discharge transfer policy with that legal representative or legal guardian, and a signature is received on the admission consent acknowledging receipt. So that's the best case scenario. If the legal representative or legal guardian, if the patient has one and they are not in the home upon admission, and this particular information was not given to a legal representative or legal guardian prior to our admission visit, because it could occur prior to. So if we already know that a patient has a legal representative, this conversation and communication could have occurred prior to the admission visit, and we could have provided the documentation of the PDF format of the rights to that legal representative, and then obtain their signature on the consent, giving us the consent to go into the patient's home. So that could have been done prior to, which would be a good case scenario if it worked out that way. But say the clinician goes into the home, finds out that there's a legal representative, the legal representative is not there, the clinician at that time is going to need to try to coordinate with the patient, the legal representative or guardian, their manager, their scheduler, to reschedule that admission visit for when that legal representative can be available, or for when contact can occur with that legal representative to get that signature on the consent. So a little tricky there. I don't think we'll have a lot of issues with this because we don't have a ton of patients that have legal representatives, but just know that that legal representative has to give consent for us to care for that patient prior to us providing care. And then the last question that they'll see within their documentation is, has the patient appointed someone to help them make medical decisions? This would be their patient selected representative. They have a yes and a no answer. If they choose yes, the yes answer will prompt them to enter that contact information into contact types. The second question that will then pop up is the patient selected representative available in the home at the time of the admission? If it's yes, wonderful. Expectation would be that we review the rights and responsibilities and discharge and transfer policy with them. If it's no, then we need to find out from the patient if they would like the rights and responsibilities mailed to the patient. Now, the first thing we want to make sure the patient understands is the rights and responsibilities, discharge transfer policy, are in the patient handbook, and that the patient selected representative can view that handbook at any time that they're in that patient's home. So they have a copy there if they need it. But if there is an instance where that patient wants an electronic copy or a mailed copy sent to their patient selected representative, we can answer with yes, and what will happen then is a coordination note will then populate where that information can be put into a template, and then that coordination note will trigger workflow to our team coordinator, medical records person, to either mail or electronically send the documents to the patient selected representative. The patient can say no, that, hey, I don't need an extra copy sent to them. They can view what I have here in the home, which would be the best case scenario financially. But again, they do have a copy in the home. Anybody that they choose to look at that, they can have a look at that. But we do have the option to mail or electronically email the document as well. So those are the 3 new questions that have been put into Point Care to hopefully help the clinicians down through the thought process of these patient contacts, and then rights and responsibilities, discharge transfer policy, and when they need to be providing that information. Okay. All right, so back to the PowerPoint. So that was the hard part, so it gets a little easier from here on out. So the next 3 documents I'm going to talk about are the next 3 notices. One is written information and instructions, which is real similar to like a plan of care. Second one is any revisions to the plan of care. The third is changes to a discharge plan. So the first one, the written information and instructions. In the new conditions of participation, we must provide to the patient the most current visit schedule, consistent with the most current plan of care, one that identifies the disciplines, it identifies medication profile, treatments and care, the instructions, education, and training, and measurable outcomes and goals. So those are the 6 items that we have to provide in writing now to the patient. So it's almost like giving the patient a copy of their plan of care. So how are we going to do this? So the steps in providing this particular information is we're going to utilize a new report that Home Care Home Base has put together called the Patient Instruction Report. And this Patient Instruction Report will actually replace the medication list that's currently going out. So not real hard. Workflow is going to kick it off, and once workflow is kicked off, the team coordinator medical records will then print it out and mail it to the patient, and they'll do this in place of mailing out the med profile. So not creating any more work for them, just replacing one report for another. If you want to look at it, you can go to R2 right now under medical records and under reports, and you'll be able to see it. It doesn't have all the required elements in it yet because we haven't turned on everything yet, but January 13th it will pull in all the required elements needed, and it will pull them into this report once the admission visit is synced to the office. So the report will be created. You won't have to do anything to create it. It'll populate with what it needs on it. And then these are the sections that you see on the screen here. The sections are patient name and demographics area, agency name and phone number. There's a place to put in the MCS or the DCS name, so that way the patient has a contact if needed. Visit frequency and schedule is on it, allergies and medications, and then all the treatment information. So that's what the report has on it. The next slide just shows you a screenshot of the top of the report. So that's what you'll be looking for in the system. Again, the workflow is going to generate during the admission process. So once that admission visit is synced in, medical records team coordinator will be able to go into their workflow and be able to pull this report and send it to the patient. And again, it will replace our current medication profile because the report has the medication profile on it. Okay, not too hard. All right, the second thing, prior to getting into the changes to the plan of care and changes to discharge plan, coordination of care. This slide is solely in here just for you to be able to have a conversation with clinicians, or if you are one of the clinicians in the field, to know the importance of the collaboration and coordination that we now see embedded in the conditions of participation. Anything that's going to impact the plan of care or the discharge plan, we have to have documentation in the medical record showing that we communicated with those that are involved in the patient's care. So we're talking the patient, we're talking the caregiver, we're talking the representative, we're talking any physician that's written orders on the plan of care, and we're talking about the physician that the patient might be discharged to once we complete our care. So CMS is really pushing for the collaboration in this patient-centered care model to make sure that the patient has what they need to recover from their illness, and that care is delivered effectively and efficiently, and they want to make sure that this coordination occurs. So we're going to have to do it, we're going to have to document it. So that's why the screen's here. It's a standard, so please review that with staff and understand the importance of. So let's go into the revisions of the plan of care. Revisions of the plan of care must be communicated to the patient, representative if they have one, caregiver, all physicians issuing orders on the plan of care, and the clinical record must show evidence that we've explained these changes to the patient and how they're going to impact the patient's care, and that we've informed all relevant physicians. So very important to any time the plan of care is revised that we communicate with those directly affected by the plan of care. What we've done to help with the process of this, of reminding staff they need to do it, as well as prompting documentation, we've created a new problem statement. We actually replaced a current problem statement with this one. The one that we replaced it with was the one that said the following physicians will be added to the plan of care, or additional physicians on the plan of care. We would list out those additional physicians. We removed that pathway and we're replacing it with this one. This one will meet a couple different needs. The problem statement is need for additional disciplines and the name of the physician or healthcare provider that the patient will be discharged to, and need to inform of discharge plans, revisions to the plan of care, and changes impacting the discharge plans. So again, we've taken all the collaboration that needs to occur surrounding the plan of care and discharge and put it into this one pathway. The order will have 2 asterisk areas in it, so staff will have to go in and put who's going to receive the patient at discharge, and also what other additional disciplines or what other additional physicians need to be on the plan of care. So those are the 2 items that will need to be entered into the plan of care order with this pathway. The pathway is going to prompt the clinician to add the pertinent additional physicians to the plan of care, and it will prompt them to add the receiving physician or healthcare provider to the plan of care. So there's your pathway. On the next slide, you will see the interventions that are associated with this pathway. The intervention states that collaboration is going to occur, and then you have 3 intervention details. One of them is that the following revisions have occurred, and it has an asterisk for staff to be able to document what those revisions were. The second intervention detail is that the following revisions have been made to the discharge plan, and has an asterisk there. So staff can enter what discharge plan changes have occurred. So they can choose one or both of those intervention details if needed. The third one is that collaboration occurred with the patient and the caregiver and with the following physicians. Has some asterisks there that staff can choose a patient or caregiver or both, and also has an asterisk to allow them to add the correct physician into that documentation. So we want to really make sure that staff know that, number one, the pathway needs to be placed on all starts of care, so it's available to every clinician for every patient, and that 2, if a plan of care change has occurred, or a discharge plan change has occurred, then they'll utilize that intervention within their documentation. They'll choose it, and then please remind them that's utmost important to go to intervention details. When they click on intervention details, they'll see the 3 intervention details, and they'll be able to provide the proper documentation that we need to support this particular standard. So they want to definitely communicate and then document their communication. Now, the one thing I will note, though, is that a physician verbal order, so say that a plan of care has changed because I've talked to a physician on the phone, told them something that was going on with the patient, the physician gave me new orders, and I wrote those new orders out as a verbal order. If I've done that, then I've documented that collaboration, because that verbal order is going to show my collaboration with the physician. So I don't need to come back into this intervention and redocument what I documented on the verbal order. So if a verbal order supports the collaboration with the physician, that's what we need to show the documentation. We don't need to do it as well in the intervention detail. What you can do in the intervention detail, though, is document the communication with the patient or the caregiver, or any other physicians that might be involved. Okay, so that's revisions to the plan of care. The next one that is pretty much just as easy is the discharge plan. So if a discharge plan has changed, we have to notify the same people. However, we have one additional person that we have to notify, and that is if the physician at discharge is going to be different than the one signing the plan of care, or the 45. And that can occur sometimes if we get a post-op patient out and the surgeon is the one giving orders on the plan of care and signing the plan of care. There may be comorbidities that keep us in that patient's home past the post-op recovery period. And if that occurs and we discharge them to a family physician, then this family physician now becomes our discharging physician, and we have to communicate with them as well as the physician signing the 45. So, and again, we do have to document that in the medical record. And if I move to the next slide, we're doing that through that same pathway that I just showed you. So that pathway does ask that we provide the discharging physician's name, and that the interventions within the pathway and the details will help prompt the clinicians to communicate with this physician if it's different than the plan of care physician, and document that communication. Now there is I'll pull up real quickly here, there is a handout, a 2-page handout for staff going over the written information and instructions, as well as the revisions to the plan of care and revisions to the discharge plan. And again, all of this is in collaboration efforts to make sure our care is effective and efficient. Gives you the steps of the written information and how that report's pulled together, and how that's going to go through workflow and be sent out to the patient's home. And then revisions to the plan of care and discharge plans gives a standard, talks about adding the pathway to every start of care, what that pathway can do for the new, for our associates providing care in the field. The second page goes over what pathway has been removed from the system. So the one that was removed was need for additional physicians. And then it was replaced with this new particular pathway, and then here is what the pathway looks like. So you can share that with patients or with your clinicians. Now the very last thing I'd like to go over that's very easy, about another 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll wrap things up. So retrieval of clinical records. We will continue the same process as we always have. If a patient or a authorized individual requests a patient record, there is a form on the internet, Form 148, that we will provide to the patient. And once the patient completes it and signs it, then we can provide that information to them. What our new requirement now is in the speed in which we have to get them this information. So right now, the intranet or the form, once the form is gotten to the patient, whether the clinician brings it out or they have somebody come in the office and pick it up, or it gets mailed to them, whatever method they receive that form, once they complete the form, which I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, or no, I'm sorry, not the next slide, but there's a handout that goes over this as well that you can use with staff. So the steps, once we provide them with the form, they complete the form with all the required elements. The second step is that same day that form needs to be brought into the office and gotten to the medical records or the team coordinator. So once the signature is on that paper from the authorized person or the patient, that starts the clock of our need to get them this particular information, the patient record, the condition states the same day, or I'm sorry, the condition states, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little off track with my mind here. The standard states that the patient record will be made available with the next home visit or within 4 business days, whichever comes first. So within 4 business days or the next home visit. The clock starts when we receive the document with the signature on it. So if the nurse receives or the therapist receives that document in the home, they can take a picture of it and send it in by email. They can hand deliver it to the office, whatever way to get it there the fastest. Medical records or team coordinator will obtain the documents, get them up to Janet Wallace, and then Janet Wallace will mail them out overnight. So hopefully we won't run into a problem with like a BID visit, because again, the regulation is we'll provide it to the patient within the next home visit or within 4 business days. So if we've got somebody being seen BID, that'll be something we'll have to work with. If we have to hand deliver the information, that comes about with a lot of other HIPAA type rules and regulations that we'll need to make sure are really tight and in place. So we really want to just mail them overnight. So hopefully when we retrieve the signed request, it'll give us time to be able to get that information within 4 business days or the next home visit. So we'll have to play around with that. It's definitely going to be difficult for us as well as for other home care agencies. And then the very last thing that we have to talk about, it'll just take a minute here and then we'll be all through. It is transfer and discharge summaries. This process has not changed a bit. However, I did put one slide here on the requirement of, when we have to get these delivered to either the receiving facility or the receiving physician. Transfer is within 2 business days of transfer or known transfer date. Discharge is within 5 business days. That hasn't changed. Workflow is staying the same. But what we want to make sure all staff know is that upon discharge or upon transfer, we are completing the care summary transfer discharge coordination note. There is a template within this coordination note that prompts our discharge, prompts our transfer information that we need to provide to the receiving facility or receiving physician. It's very important that we provide them with certain pieces of information per the conditions of participation as well as our ACHC. So certain pieces of information are needed and the template will prompt this particular information. This coordination note then gets pulled onto the episode summary report, and that's what we're mailing out or sending out. So we just want to make sure we follow that process and that we're making sure that that coordination note is being completed and that the coordination note is showing up on the episode summary report. The last slide just gives you an overview of the notifications and also with who the notifications can be sent to. So if you want a quick overview, you can look at this. That's it. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we would be glad to answer anything, any questions that you might have. You can speak to your managers or supervisors. You can reach out to myself, Andrea Callahan, or Susie Oliver, Judy Schuler, Lori Kors. But thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to doing session 3 on December the 20th. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.